We are following breaking news from Ottawa, where Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland has announced she has resigned. Now, in a letter posted to X addressed to the Prime Minister, Freeland says the Prime Minister and her have found themselves at odds over the past few weeks about the best path forward for Canada. She says the Prime Minister told her on Friday that he no longer wanted her to serve as Finance Minister and was offered another job in Cabinet. The letter goes on to say, upon further reflection, she has concluded the only honest and viable path is to resign from Cabinet. Let's bring in now our Glen McGregor, who is standing by on Parliament Hill. Glen, this is a bombshell. Were we expecting this?
Absolutely not expecting this. We were expecting today, Karen, to be covering Chrystia Freeland in her announcement of the fall economic statement. In fact, at about 10 a.m. was when the first copies would go out to journalists under embargo. That means they couldn't report on any of it until Freeland delivers it at 4 p.m. We don't know what's going to happen now because the fall economic statement is entirely a work attributed to the finance minister. She was supposed to have a press conference within the embargo space at around 2 p.m. to talk about the fall economic statement, lay out the future of the Canadian economy, new measures that are being taken. Instead, she quits Cabinet. I mean, it's an absolutely astounding development. And in fact, that tweet came out just as we were hearing from another Cabinet Minister, Sean Fraser, who's the Housing Minister, announcing his resignation. So in the period of, 10 minutes, effectively, you have two resignations of two very senior Cabinet Ministers, both of whom have been touted at various times as possible successors to Justin Trudeau. Now, the thing about the Freelands that is so damaging is she talks about the differences in this letter, the open letter to the Prime Minister that she's put out on Twitter today. She talks about the differences in approach between her and Justin Trudeau, particularly it seems to be over the although she doesn't say this emphatically, it seems to be referring to this planned GST cut that came in force on Saturday. It's going to be in place for 2 months, as well as the $250 per person checks that the Liberal government was planning to send out in April to everyone who had an income in 2023. And I'm going to read you what Freeland writes in her letter here because she talks about the threat of these tariffs that Donald Trump has talked about imposing. And Freeland says we need to keep our fiscal powder dry today so we can have the reserves we may need for a coming tariff war. That means eschewing costly political gimmicks. So referencing, we think she's referring to the GST holiday, which a lot of economists thought was wrong-headed and wasn't going to make a difference for most people, but was going to cause a lot of aggravation for small businesses in particular. So what happens now? Well, almost certainly a cabinet shuffle, possibly as early as Wednesday this week, that the Prime Minister will now have to fill in that vacancy for Finance Minister. Who is the most likely contender? Well, there's been media reports circulating over the last week that talks have resumed between the Prime Minister's office and former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. He is obviously the most likely person to be named to that position if he wants it. That's still a big unknown right now because there's been attempts to court Mark Carney before to bring him into federal politics. He agreed back in September to serve as kind of an advisor to the leader of the Liberal Party, who is Justin Trudeau, but not being an advisor to the Prime Minister. So he's been kind of hovering on the periphery for a little while now. It's looking very much like that the Prime Minister asked Chrystia Freeland to step aside on Friday to make room for Mark Carney, although we have no confirmation yet. That's actually what's going to happen. Everything right now, including the fall economic statement, I was expecting to be covering today, now in flux. We don't know what's going to happen. So all I can say is stay tuned to 24/7 throughout the day on City News for more updates.
Glen, as you mentioned, two high-level cabinet ministers stepping down just in a period of hours. Could this be seen as a revolt against the Trudeau government?
I think it has to be seen, at least a vote of waning confidence in Justin Trudeau's leadership. There was, you remember, Karen, earlier this fall, a sort of a mini revolt by members of Parliament, Liberal members of Parliament within the Liberal caucus. Some of them spoke out at a caucus meeting saying it was time for Justin Trudeau to step down because they don't think he can win again. And of course, those MPs, those are the people who are going to lose their jobs if there is a big landslide in the next election, as the polls suggest. So yeah, this is obviously quite damaging. There have been other cabinet ministers who have announced they are not going to run again, including Pablo Rodriguez, who had been the transport minister. He decided to seek the leadership of the Quebec Liberal Party. It's common that you have turnover amongst cabinet ministers because they tend to be just generally the most senior members of your caucus. They are by definition older, closer to retirement age. So, every time, every 4 years or so, you do get a turnover. But this is unprecedented. There's no way for the Liberal government to spin this as anything but as an absolute disaster. To have Chrystia Freeland do this, to announce her resignation in such a public way the morning she is supposed to present Canada's economic vision, the government's roadmap, fiscal roadmap for the coming year. It's absolutely, I've covered politics a long time, Karen, and I've never seen anything like this. This is a government now that is listing badly, deeply in disarray, and unclear now how they are going to recover from this.
Okay, Glen McGregor on Parliament Hill will be watching your coverage throughout the day on City News 24/7. Glen, thank you so much.